Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us in these very challenging times. We really appreciate it. We're very pleased to have with us today one of our international distinguished speakers, Dr. Roger van Hossel, the Managing Director and the Captain of the Food Valley Crew in Netherlands. Dr. van Hossel has been involved in this company since its establishment in 2004. He is an initiator and inspirator, and he promotes the Food Valley concept, which is about accelerating innovation by matching companies, research partners, and governments, and helps incubating food clusters all around the world. He has a PhD in international economics. Today, Dr. van Hossel will be speaking about clustering and the role of clusters in crisis, meaning he will basically shed the light on the relevance of cluster organizations to crisis challenges, which is actually very applicable to our country and what's happening in this period in Lebanon. During period of economic crisis, new collaborations between parties are very important. And so the talk will illustrate how Agri-Food cluster organizations can contribute significantly to addressing these challenges. Please join me in welcoming Dr. van Hossel.
Thank you very much for these kind words and kind introductions. Yes, so my name is Roger, and I am from a country where there's no crisis. So I feel a bit uncomfortable in talking as a kind of expert on crisis management. Who am I to talk about that? So I'll do my best to make the kind of conversion to what we do and how it could help in crisis situation. But you're much more an expert in that than I am. So as I just briefly mentioned, so I'm here at the Faculty of Agriculture. I don't know what the official name is. So I often deal with people with this background, whereas I don't have that background myself. But I'm comfortable in these kind of surroundings because we are very close to Wageningen University. But when I started this job, I recall that when they were looking for someone to start this new organization, they wanted someone from the outside world, as they said. So they picked one from Rotterdam. That was me. At the moment, so most of the time I work on with the organization. That's like 95% of what I do. But apart from that, I'm also involved in a number of other things. So one of it is a new initiative in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, where last year a food cluster was started. Completely different world again, of course, but very challenging and interesting as well. I'm very proud to have been involved with Agri-Tech here now since 3 years in Lebanon. Lots of steering committees, but also the only Dutch thing apart from Food Valley that I do is quite an interesting initiative which is called National Week Without Meat. So there was 2 years ago there was a young communication lady who had this dream in the Netherlands of starting a kind of new movement which would stimulate people not to have meat in 1 week. And it's quite a big success, frankly speaking, and I'm helping her a bit in that. So quite different kind of things, but they all relate to collaboration, connecting people, organizations, thoughts. That's what I do in life. So during this presentation, I would first like to say a bit more about how I would look at what are clusters, what are the definitions one uses, and how do we define clusters. Introduce then subsequently the organization I work for. For a long time, I dare to say it's a young organization, but yeah, it's now 15 years there, so it's not that young anymore. 2004 we started. I'll tell a bit more about how we started, why did we start, and how did it go over time. Then try to relate to what you could do, and if it comes to crisis, give some examples of things we have done, and you might not consider that crisis, but for Dutch standards they were at least frustrations out there. And in this environment of a highly esteemed university, of course I would like to say something about the links between academia and companies, which is a debate in any place in the world as far as I've figured out. How can you collaborate and how does it work? Some slides to show on that, and then some conclusions. If you have any remarks or thoughts, or think what is he talking about, or this is a weird remark, I love to interact, so please don't hesitate to say anything during my talk. I would love to have that conversation. Nowadays, clusters are all over the world. So if you go to Ethiopia, the people will say we have like 150 clusters, and with so many clusters all over the place. And Vietnam, and everywhere there's clusters. In the Netherlands, there's last week the Minister of Economic Affairs says he has a new kind of strategy document. It's all about clusters. And sometimes I wonder if people have the same definition. I'm pretty certain they don't. They don't have the same definition. But the whole idea goes back to what Michael Porter wrote like 30 years ago already. He wrote this book. I forgot the name actually. But he wrote a book on places in the world where things were really connected. Companies and research and governments would, in a kind of concentrated way, interact a lot and would become powerful. And one of the examples he gave in those days, in this really thick book, was on the flower cluster in the Netherlands. So the Netherlands is a big exporter of flower bulbs, seeds and all that. And he had looked at it and said, oh, there's a lot of interaction between the logistics companies, universities, everyone, and it's concentrated in an area, and he called that one of the clusters already in those days. And I think that in itself, if you look at systems, it's still quite relevant. That if you talk about clusters, it is about a geographical concentration of parties that are connected and have something in common. Geography is always a debate. It really depends on whom do you talk to, but there is always these elements in there. So it's about leading companies, it's about connecting to research, it's about governments connecting one way or another, and also about others that contribute to the system, like lawyers and labor firms and all that. And I think that's still quite applicable. Now, the cluster initiative, that is different from a cluster initiative. Like Good is a cluster initiative or a cluster organization, and Food Valley is one too. But in many places there is not a specific organization. Like in Silicon Valley, the example we always look at, there is not a Silicon Valley cluster organization. But you do have a large concentration of companies and research, obviously, interacting, and banks and all that. So it's not necessarily the case. And cluster initiatives often come into existence when something is not really working properly. There's frustration for one reason or another, because in the end you're not needed in the perfect world anymore. If investors can easily find the companies they would like to invest in, bankers can find a way around, universities and companies connect easily, why should you need a cluster? But in many cases it's not a perfect world. And then you see that increasingly these kind of cluster initiatives come into existence, like a kind of organized collaboration between firms, governments in many cases, and academia, where you strive for common goals and try to establish more linkages than in the past. But the way it's defined here already, it suggests already that the role of a cluster organization is a modest one. It's not about you as a cluster organization, it is about the performance of companies and universities and the combination between them. So to give you an example, for instance, we have a lot of visitors maybe also from China. And you sometimes end up in this interesting situation that someone from China comes over and he meets all these people. And he meets also the chairperson of the university and says, okay, so if I understand it correctly, the university is one of the players in the cluster, and you are the CEO of the cluster, so you are the boss of, let's say, the university as well. I love to experience that, but that of course is not true. You're just somewhere in between, in a kind of horizontal collaboration between parties, and try to initiate new things and sometimes also manage them. No? But there's no hierarchy in a cluster. That's basically what I try to say. So clusters in itself, they evolve, and they are there naturally, yes or no. So frankly, I don't believe in clusters to be designed. So in the Netherlands, nowadays, since clusters are so popular, you see that a lot of provinces, for instance, they say, well, what is our cluster then? And they will hire a company, so we've looked at you, and you are a paper cluster because you have 3 paper companies or whatever, and you have a kind of polytechnic there, so that's a cluster. That is nonsense, I would say. There's nothing about it. They are there or they're not there, and you can make them stronger or get more out of it by putting conscious things into action. And I will give examples of that later on. Yeah?
What's the difference between a cluster and the value chain?
A value chain in many cases is a value chain for one particular vertical, And that is not the case here. Actually, even I would put it more explicit. One of the things a cluster organization can do is establish the links between different value chains. Yeah. So when this organization where I work for started in 2004, no one talked about clusters, actually. We didn't know the word. And the reason why Food Valley was started in those days was that on the one hand, it was felt that challenges in, let's say, the food system became more complicated, and no one is able to address the challenges on their own. So, world is coming. We then already talked about sustainability issues and more healthy nutrition and all that. And on the other hand, it was also concluded by not only companies, but also in our case, Wageningen University and Niso Food Research, which is a contract research organization, that the gap between the fantastic knowledge base available in that particular area where we are based, that is in Wageningen, a small town, the eastern part of the country, and the companies was really huge. It's a typical European thing. You often see, well, there's a big gap between knowledge and those that need the knowledge. That was also seen here. And there was, on the one hand, there was a group of local food companies that met on a regular basis. They would meet in one of the companies like every month, and they would discuss challenges they would have. And they were constantly debating like, isn't it possible to have better connections to, let's say, the knowledge base around, and how do you organize it? And at the same time, at the university, there was a professor in those days. He's still alive, he's really old now. And during one of his public lectures, he started to use the name Food Valley, as if, gosh, if you look at what we have here in terms of knowledge, and all these knowledge workers on the one hand, and we are based in something called Gelderse Vallei. It's 30 meters of high difference, but we call that a valley because we don't have mountains in the lands. So wouldn't it be great if we could make this into a food valley? And the name resonated. People loved that name. So the name was there, and officially it was registered by the university, not by the company. So he was there telling a story about, my dream is to make this into a food valley, like one big concentration of people working on the future of food systems. That was his idea. On the other hand, you had a company said, well, there's quite a number of us, and most of us in this region, we're not production companies so much, but we work on knowledge, many R&D oriented organizations. How come we're not connected the way we would like to be connected to these other organizations? And they met, apparently, and they said, well, we should start all over again. We need a kind of separate, small, lean organization which would primarily listen to the needs of companies if it comes to innovation, because that's our keyword, is always about innovation, and try to help them out without becoming a knowledge supplier ourselves, because the knowledge is there, and without becoming a company. That's quite and without becoming a government, because we have all those in place. And I recall that when I started in this job, I didn't know what to do. It was, okay, yeah, I like to bridge gaps. I like companies a lot. I like the world of universities, really interesting. But what am I going to do? Because what is there if you have already so many institutions in place? Because must be here the same, but in the Netherlands you have, in the university, you have you have business development managers. They have to acquire projects from the outside world. You have a lot of agencies in the government that are there to support companies that are interested in innovation and all that. So what is the role in between? But apparently there was a role because people wanted something new. So we had to define ourselves what it exactly is and what do you do in between all those different institutions that were there already in the first place. That was 15 years ago. And one of the first things we did in week number 2 was that we invited a lot of local companies for an afternoon meeting. And that meeting was in the Dutch Bakery Center. It's a kind of training center for people in the bakery industry. And we literally baked bread over there, and then after 1.5 hours or so, everyone was having a good time, and they were exchanging ideas. And then I said, well, can I please have your attention? And then, do you like it? Yeah, I like it a lot. I said, well, we have good news. We will have many of these meetings, but maybe the not so good news is that from next time onwards you have to pay for this. Because if you don't pay, there's no commitment. There's no free lunch or whatever. And actually everyone said, apart from one person, who's now the chairperson of the Dutch Food Association, said, well, why should I pay? And the rest said, well, I can imagine, if you add value, why shouldn't we pay? And then so we had a starting point, because we have to work with universities, governments probably involved, not that much in those days, and companies, but you have to know whom you're serving, who is your master you work for. And our idea was, well, if you have commitment of companies, every year they will have to pay the bill, and they will decide whether you have added value, yes or no, otherwise they simply don't pay. So we'd like that incentive to be in place. So that was 15 years ago. Over the years, things went better and not so good, and there was always a kind of struggle between are we there, is it a kind of public facility or not? You are there for everyone in principle, but if you look at the simple business model, who pays this kind of organization, there's always a struggle, because the biggest companies have, of course, most budget available, but if you're really honest, you know that if it comes to it, you potentially add most value to smaller companies, but they cannot pay the bill. So what are you going to do? Are you there for Unilever and Friesland Campina only? Yeah, then you become a kind of private consultancy innovation firm kind of thing. Or are you there for SMEs? But who pays your salary then? Eh? So it was always this mixture of public and private funding, and it went like this all the time. And at some stage we felt, well, it would be good to have even more diversity. So not only Dutch funding and EU funding, but also more for individual companies. But it became a bit of a hassle. If you do too much for big companies, where do you still put your hours then in for the system as a whole? And then 2 years ago, the biggest public funder said, they said, well, yeah, there's not so much funding available, so we cut budget 50%. So we had to change the organization again, make it smaller and leaner, and we said, well, we have to have a company next to it as well for bad times. And then, in our case, Unilever decided to put its Global Food R&D Center just around the corner, and then government changed its mind. So, oh, it is apparently really important what you're doing, so we're going to make it bigger. We're not going to cut back budget, but we're going to make it bigger. So they hired McKinsey, and they said, well, there's going to be a 10-year plan. So from January onwards, so since 2 weeks, we are growing a lot, and we're growing 3 times as big. But it also gives you the vulnerability of this kind of systems. That if you're there for everyone, public money is important, but public money is also, I hardly dare to say here, but it's not the most stable funding you can have in life. So 15 years. I have a short video of 1.5 or 2 minutes to give you kind of idea of the kind of things we have done or are doing. Oh, there's no sound. Oh. Oh. Yeah, it says volume here, but doesn't. No.
Seems to be on.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of noise anyway, so I can also do without. So what we do is a mixture of many things. So the starting point is always these companies. So we have a member-based organization. It's a mixture of small and big companies from different subsectors, plus enablers of innovation, so specialized law firms or engineering companies. And everything always starts with the question of companies, interested in solving a problem that they cannot or don't want to solve on their own. So we always look for a kind of common denominator, and that ranges from technological-based projects to also human capital kind of things. So you just saw all these international students, for instance, there. That was a project that started with the need of companies who said, look, we have all these bright students coming over here for 2 years doing their masters, and then they leave. An internship is only like 3 months. Isn't it a pity? We don't really get to know them. Is it possible to find a way of really getting to know them and see if we can hire them afterwards? So we sat around the table with the university, is there any possibility to extend the internship? And in the end, they agreed to have an internship of 1 year. So they would do all the compulsory work, everything is done, and then they work in the company for 1 year. So they are in the Netherlands for 3 years instead of 2, and they're the best students. It's much tougher for an international student to get into the university than it would be for me, for instance. So they're highly motivated, smart students, and most of them, they continue their PhD, but then they work for these companies. It happens all the time. So you have, it's a lot about international connections for these companies. We go abroad ourselves under the flag of Food Valley. It's a mixture of many things we do, and that makes it difficult also, because if you're demand-driven and you have a team, it's now 15, it will grow to about 30 in the coming months. It sounds a lot, especially if you have to compare it to Jehan, who has to do it basically on her own. But it's not that big if you have so many questions come in all the time. So one of the tricks is that you have the people in the network do most of the work after you have initiated it, but we also manage programs ourselves. Now, so what happened, I know it's way too full, but yeah. So what happened in the last year was that I said, well, there was this inclination to say, well, innovation is important, yes. We need long-term commitment, so bigger companies and also the university said, well, we would like to have a 10-year program, which is highly unusual also in our case to commit for 10 years and try to take away all the fragmentation in the support infrastructure, so to say, that we have. You know, we had 3 support programs for young companies. And yes, they have a slightly different orientation, but for startup companies it's impossible to understand where they should knock on the door. We have shared facilities in the university, but also in different companies. Most people don't know that they can use that facility and what the conditions are under which they can use that, and there are big targets to have more people make use of that, but now the management of that part was in the university. So these kind of things are all put under the new umbrella of this 2030 program. So no, if it is about having other people make use of facilities or pilot plant stuff, it's not going to be in the university anymore, it's going to be in the Food Valley organization. If it is about startup programs, which are now in 3 places, again, put it under one umbrella. Another thing we did is that we said, yeah, it's impossible to work on all topics in the world, it's too big. So we work on these 4, circular agriculture, protein balance, healthy food, and technology and data. So what we have done in the last few months is that we had experts look into, on the one hand, where can we really make a difference in the system in the sense of knowledge available and facilities available. And on the other hand, look at which companies are willing and interested in really participating in terms of investment. So, of course, that is what we are there for. So that started now. It's in terms of, let's say, organizational development is quite a challenge, as you can imagine, because it's also a trust thing, to say that, well, if there's a pot of money available, for instance, for pilot plant facilities, and it's put in our hands now. And it used to be somewhere else, so it's really a matter of investing a lot in the trust. Is this going okay? It's on governance and all that, and at the same time, we as an organization would like to stay as lean and responsive as we has always been. That's our challenge at the moment. But it is quite it's an interesting time for sure. So that is Food Valley. It's a small organization, 15 now growing to 30 people, independent organization. So it's a not-for-profit organization, not owned by anyone. I just report to a board. In that board we have people from industry, academia, and from government. Majority is always industry in our case, and we have an independent chairperson. Yeah, so we work a lot on innovation, and innovation starts in our case from seeing to it that individual questions of companies are being answered, sometimes so that they just call us up or pass by every day. And sometimes we know the answer right away, sometimes it's more complicated, so we connect them to others. And in other cases we are going to build programs, and in the programs you have different parties working on the same topic. Could be anything, so interventions in hospitals, to milk genomics, all kinds of topics. And the common denominator is that you need more parties for that, and they're willing to share and be relatively open. And our role is then to see to it that the right people are around the table that could work in that program, in the consortia. If we need public money, we look for public money with them. And then the role stops where people want us to stop. So sometimes people might say, well, thank you so much, and we can continue now. We have our own project management here in place. In other cases, they will say, no, we want you also to manage the program as a kind of neutral project or program manager, and that's what we also do. I picked a few examples of things that we have done which at least started with a clear frustration, so yeah, to resemble a bit a crisis situation. So one of them is, and I think someone told me already, it's completely different than in Lebanon, but it has to do with the challenge of lack of operators. In the Netherlands, at let's say the mid-level technology level, so kids that go to secondary education for 4 years, they continue somewhere else, the lower level education level. They go to a place where they are supposed to be trained for a profession or be prepared for a particular profession. We see that in that kind of educational system, the dropout rates are really high, like sometimes 40–50%. And the most important reason is that the kids over there, they don't want to learn from books. It's too, so they sit in classrooms like this and they don't want to be in classrooms. That's basically it. So it doesn't resonate with them. They get bored and frustrated. They want to work with their hands, basically. So this has been going on for years. And at the same time, you see in many of the factories that the companies are not satisfied with the people they can get. And it's not only the number from which they can choose if they have vacancies, but also the attitude and the things they've learned. It's too far from reality. That's basically it. So what happened a few years ago was that a guy knocked on our door and he said, well, I have a solution for that. You know, the solution could be that we start a real company producing real stuff, in this case, kind of juice. And wouldn't it be great if you can convert the whole curriculum of these young kids into working in the company? So how does it work? So it's not only the technology classes, but also the English classes are done over there. So you take them completely out of the traditional school system. And yeah, we thought the idea was good, but how do you realize that? So we went to a number of these schools, and there was one school that said, yeah, we have space available, and there is a need, and what I could do is that they get a certain amount of money for every student, so to say, that we bring in this place, and that kind of money, and then maybe if we can find the people who could train them as well, that would be really good. So we went to the different companies, and it was one, I think it was, this was Friesland Campino or Heinz said, well, we have this kind of production line of filler, we don't use that anymore, so you can have it, it's good. And by the way, we also have a maintenance engineer who is about to retire, and he would love to work with these kids over there. So that's what we started to do, and what they learned basically is not only the regular courses, what they also learned was what it is to work in shifts. How does it work when you have a next shift? How to behave if there's also women in the room, these kind of silly things. They're so proud of that place. It was the first of its kind, and there are now quite a number of them in the Netherlands. And so our role was to work out the concept, look for the companies that were willing to invest, and I was also on the board of this one for 2 years, that what we do, and then we go out of it if it's not needed anymore. So that was on education. Another thing that we often see is that, well, one of the big topics in Western Europe now is meat replacement, plant-based foods. And there's a lot of small companies who go into that area, but they are small. And so you see that often they start to produce their first products literally in their own kitchen. And then they have to, well, it's a success of people, oh, I would like to buy more of that. There's no place where they can go. They think there's no place where they can go. And they cannot invest, they don't have the capital to build their own production line, which makes sense. So we started the whole platform, we call it the protein cluster, where all these companies are in. Not all, but now about 50 now, it's growing really fast. But again, we asked them, you have to pay for this, and we can help you in many ways. So we can help you in your own company, and so we have all these sessions in the companies. We can help you if you have questions about novel food regulation, EFSA kind of things. They wanted to have a kind of production line where they could share facilities. So we found a slaughterhouse actually that wanted to invest in this, and it's going like mad. And I think last week that we launched was a simple map of facilities available in the Netherlands, where you can make use of production facilities in different fields. And you can see exactly, well, in this company they have capacity available and you can go there. These are the certifications, this is the volume you can have, and you have to call him. So these kind of simple things are typically done by us. And so it was launched last Thursday, and we had thousands of reactions to this for some reason, so it overwhelmed us a bit, but very simple stuff. Another example that we did with schools, higher education, is on market access. Well, we have a big neighbor called Germany, and most companies dream of selling in Germany, smaller companies as well, but it's pretty difficult. So first of all, we think we can speak German, we can't really that well, so there things go wrong already. But it's also a complicated market. It is different in terms of preferences of taste, somewhat different, design of packaging is somewhat different, and that's let alone, let's say, supply chains, which are completely different. So again, quite a number of these companies, smaller ones, knocked on the door, said, "Oh, I can't make it, I go there sometimes, but I feel something goes wrong, but it's not really that clear." There's one school in the Netherlands called the Higher Agricultural School. So it's not a university, it's one level lower, it's more applied, but it's a really good school. And it's the only one of its kind in the Netherlands where they have a food and design department. So we talked to the management of them, we have this problem, we have all these companies interested in Germany, but these typically Dutch products, they don't resonate, and people are still convinced that if they would tweak it a bit, it would resonate with them, so could you help us out on that? So we built again a consortia, so it's them, it's FAFS over there. And the program was called Hello Market, and we had professional consultants around them, supervising them, and they started to redesign typically Dutch products. They did these kind of taste preference kind of things with Germans, and sometimes also the taste was tweaked a bit. And they went to all kinds of places in Germany to bring that to the fore. And you see so we really picked, you wouldn't like it, but Boerenworst, it's really very Dutch products. We took them to the German market, but in a somewhat different way than we would used to do in the past. So yeah, the program again was started by us and managed by us, but then together with this Haas school. Another one is this, food waste, of course, big topic in any country in the world, and we are relatively close to a retail chain in the Netherlands called Albert Heijn. It's the biggest in the Netherlands. And they have this group of young high potentials that, it's like 70 of them. They have like 1 to 5 years of work experience, and they work as a manager in one of the shops. They have about 1,000 or 1,100 shops. And but this group is also ambitious, young people who are ambitious. So they met with us and said, we would like to do more than just manage a shop. And what can we do? What is a good topic? Yeah, they came up with food waste, and we started to work on this idea of having a restaurant where you use the products which are about to be thrown away in the containers. It's called in-stock. Well, wouldn't it be possible to get these products off the shelves and save them from being thrown away into the containers and use them to process in a restaurant? So the first restaurant was in Amsterdam. It was a pop-up restaurant like 2 years ago. And it was it. People loved the whole, the concept is nice, so people loved to go there. They were on television, all that. And then they had a normal restaurant, and then they went to the Utrecht, which is a central university town in Nel. And then they went to The Hague, opposite the Dutch parliament, so all the politicians like to show off. They go there all the time. But then so we were involved in that, but then they faced a problem 1 year ago. And that whereas they had become loose of Albert Heijn. So there's two young ladies and one young guy. They're the management of this organization. And they said, well, we need more space to maneuver. Being part of Albert Heijn is not so smart because you have to go to the board all the time, and we have so big plans. They were invited by Google to see if they could roll out this whole idea in the US and all that. So it's going pretty fast. And they couldn't handle it, so Albert Heijn said, yeah, we understand, so now it's yours, you can have it, it's your company. But it also implied that the local managers were like, why should we spend time on having some of the products not be thrown away? What is in it for us? It wasn't too clear. So the products coming from Albert Heijn were going like this. So that was difficult if you have these restaurants and you don't have the input, the raw material anymore. And then like 6 months ago they started something called in-stock market. Said, yeah, we still need the materials, of course, and we know that there's lots of companies available that have, for instance, vegetables which have strange shapes that you cannot put on the shelves in the Netherlands because they have a certain idea of how a banana looks or whatever you have. So why don't we start trading this? Not to consumers, but to chefs of restaurants. And yeah, it's exploding now at the moment. So what it implies is that, for instance, Google in Amsterdam, which is quite a big organization, they get all the supplies from them, and they like to say, oh, we save all these vegetables over there. So it transformed into something completely new. Our biggest challenge as an organization is this now. Food Valley, as the name already implies, is about food. And yes, we always say, yeah, agriculture and food, it's value chains or supply chains, as you said. We don't like to make the distinction, and some people might say, yeah, but agriculture is completely different from food for many, many reasons. Well, but in reality, we are more at ease in the food world than in the pure agricultural world. But what happened a few months ago in the Netherlands, that's what we call a crisis. We had a nitrogen crisis. So it was the highest court in the Netherlands concluded that we did not comply with EU regulations if it comes to nitrogen, implying again that yeah, a lot of the farmers had to invest heavily in bringing back their levels, and they said, no, this is too much. Over the last 10 years or 20 years, we had to invest in so many things that you told us we had to do, and the only thing was, what happened is that our income has gone down. So they started to protest. They also block roads in a different way, but for Dutch standards, like, gosh, we are in a crisis. What are we going to do? What is the role of agriculture in the Netherlands? We are the second largest exporter, but are we supposed to be? It's ridiculous for such a small country. Why do we have so much animal husbandry? Isn't it weird? Why it should be in other places? So it's still, I would say, the most sensitive political debate we have at the moment, where to go with agriculture. Whereas 2 years ago, yeah, many people saw us still as one of the examples in the world, since we have so many kilograms per square meter tomato produced. Still many people say it's a good system, but it's under pressure. And what happened is then that, yeah, the government said, well, Food Valley, go for it. Huh? You have to work on that. And then I said, gosh, we have to work on that. What should we do? So many people know much more about it than we do. So that is our challenge. So we work with a lot of people from Wageningen University, help us, because you are working, you have fields everywhere, experimental stations. So what could be our role? And up till now, this is that was a status of last week. Yeah, those are the lines of action: more robust crop production, healthy soil, a lot better use of manure. And I still don't know what our role is, frankly speaking. If you look at this, what you often see is that, at least in a country like the Netherlands, a lot of research is put into that. So Wageningen University is all over the place to work on this. And we're still looking for our role, whereas in the other ones that was completely clear. You know, we are the in-between, we don't sell anything ourselves, we don't do research, but we know all these people and we can manage consortia. In this case, when you look at agriculture in the Netherlands, historically it is organized in a very good way already for a long, long time. You have a lot of vested interests and links between knowledge suppliers and, let's say, the farmers' associations. Nevertheless, we were asked to build this program, and I can't tell you how it's going to look yet. So the only thing we can offer is that we know that we're not duplicating anything. Like if research is done or outcomes are known, we use them. So we're not going to put money on the table which we think is not necessary for that, but we're still a bit struggling with the role. But this is newest for us. So maybe 1 year from now, hopefully I can tell you about fantastic success stories, but at the moment it's still somewhere in the dark. I'm pretty certain that this is not my last slide.
Maybe let's try this. Okay.
Ah, yes. Yeah, this is perfect. Oh. No, it doesn't work anymore. Maybe it's empty or so.
Maybe. Okay.
So open up.
Sorry.
No problem at all. So I have a few slides on academia and companies. since I'm here in an academic environment, so I thought it would be good to share a bit of the experience as well. Food Valley as an organization would not have existed if Wageningen University hadn't been there. That's more than certain. And there's a lot of interaction between Wageningen University and my team and the companies, but they're also very different. And I think that if you, I don't know how it is in your case, but I would really like to learn. I think that often from a government perspective, they think in these terms way too easily in the Netherlands. So it's like, you often have these remarks in our parliament, well, which basically come down to the fact that they say, well, we have paid you, so you are there for everyone, so just do what you have to do as a university. On the other hand, we know that the university, there's a lot of pressure to get money from the outside world to do projects, and if you have a lot of facilities available, you're not cheap. And if you're in research, of course, yeah, for a short period I was in research myself. It's also about publication. So helping companies and SMEs is not the highest priority for many. That's a difficult ball game to be in. And I recall that when we started, so in 2004, there was quite a number of professors that would come to us and would say, well, we are in this EU project and it's mandatory to have a number of SMEs in that project. Can you give me some SMEs? And then I took some time to answer, okay, but frankly speaking, I try to understand what you do, but I'll come back to you once I think that SMEs are in need of your knowledge. It shouldn't be the other way around, because many of these companies are going to be disappointed by what you do. It's too complicated for them. It's not applicable for them. That's difficult. So in the Netherlands, there's often a lot of debate on this, and I would say it's really about investing also in understanding each other's drivers. It's too easy to talk in terms of cliches. You know, you are there, you have all this knowledge on this shelf kind of stuff, which is really ridiculous. So, but also the other way around. So why are companies, how do they have to act? So understanding the educational part, R&D and the societal impact kind of orientation versus market share, return on investment and growth, which are so prevalent in companies, is the kind of cliche thing, but still it's there. I took this slide from he is Dutch, but he hasn't lived in the Netherlands, a professor in the UK. And he said, well, universities are about societal impact and companies are not. I said, well, I think that's really a cliche. It's not true. There are so many companies, certainly young entrepreneurs, for whom societal impact is really an important driver as well. So please be careful in putting these kind of cliches on the table, but try to invest in what drives people in universities, but also what drives people in companies. And in our case, sometimes people are way too blunt or too fast and drawing conclusions on that, and then you miss the potential of doing more with each other, I would say. It's also a bit like this I don't like these kind of cliches, like, oh, you have the elephant, that's a university, and I've been doing this for ages, and we take our time, and then you have all these dynamic, cute animals, and they run around all the time. You know, I hear this all the time. It's a kind of popular thing to say in companies, like, oh, a university, that was a disaster, they only want money and they do the research and never get back what they had in mind, or pay like so many money and then the only thing they have is a problem definition or whatever, that kind of, but also the other way around, and that's a pity. There's so much you can do together if you invest a bit more and what drives you. And it's, what I've learned over the years is a bit like, it's really about the people. So in our case, in universities and research institutes, we know exactly who loves to work with companies, you know, and takes his or her time for that, and others who don't. And that's also perfectly cool. Some people are really good in the laboratory and do their work over there. That's not a part of what the academic system is, and we as Food Valley shouldn't bother them, and the other way around. It's a different kind of work. So it's really about people. It's not about institutions for me. If you get these signals, I always call people up. If I've heard about, oh, Food Valley is doing this or that, and I just call people, you know, what is tell me what your frustration is, and we can talk about it. Why not? Why not? And so taking care of signals and working on them is important. These structures, so yeah, you have to be, I would say it's important also to be legally linked one way or another. So always in our board there's people from the academic world, And also the other way around, I sit on these boards which are very close to the university, and that really helps a lot. If you sit on each other's board and you discuss what the challenges are, it becomes much more informal. So, you know, having structures there that link each other is crucial, I would say, and also being physically close to each other. We as an organization, we're going to move to the university campus, and frankly speaking, I didn't want it for 15 years because I felt, yeah, being on the campus might give this image that we are part of the university, and we are not, because we are there primarily for the companies. And over the years, we see that there's more on that campus. There's now 3,000 people working, not being part of the university. So also it has changed, it certainly has changed. And I'm really looking forward to be really close to these people, because I'm sure that there will be more of an understanding and more synergy between us than we had in the past. So places are also, I would say, of prime importance, not being too far from each other. So my feeling is that, at least in the Netherlands, could be somewhat different here, but you often have to explain why you are there. If you start a cluster organization on top of all the other organizations which are there already, often for decades, yeah, people start posing questions. Why do we need it? We have already this, we have already that. And here are a few of the things that I have found over the time where you can make a difference. One of them is for sure that this cluster organization that also holds for good are also very close to smaller companies. And we love to build these research programs in the Netherlands, but what you see in those programs is that universities and big companies sit around the table simply because they have the staff to do so, and the smaller ones don't have the opportunity to do so. We are very close to them, so having them really on board makes a difference. And certainly in my country, if it comes to innovation, you see that they play a crucial role. Many of the good ideas come from smaller companies, but they're not, it's difficult for them to be in the system and give their input. And yeah, we have certainly a role to play. Also the enablers, you know, sometimes these really specialized small organizations are really brilliant at this one particular thing. I always call them our hidden gems. They're close to these clusters often, whereas they're not part of big organizations. Often you see that these clusters, all of them are small. You know, the 15 to 30 people in our case is considered really big for cluster, whereas for other organizations it's like peanuts, of course. And since you are small, you're also fast. It's not because the people working in clusters are faster than other people, but you simply don't have a bureaucracy. It's one team, basically. So you see that in responding to companies, that is, yeah, they like that, because you know exactly whom to talk to. There's no procedures and all that, which makes it easier to connect. We don't have, we are getting them now, but for 15 years we didn't have policy instruments ourselves. So our role has always been, look, there's policy instruments to support research or companies on all kinds of levels, from local level till EU and what have you, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, all that. But we don't have them ourselves. And if you have these policy instruments, for instance, as a development agency, we in the Netherlands or in Europe, you have all these development agencies. Yeah, the primary role is to make as much impact with the money you have available for a certain instrument as possible. That is your role. Whereas if you work from this side, yeah, questions are so different all the time, in different shapes and forms. We can act like, okay, we don't have them, we make use of them, but it's not like you have to fit into this particular policy instrument. No, not at all. And it makes you more flexible. The neutrality is crucial. It's always being so close to Wageningen. Maybe you don't know Wageningen, but that's a green university in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the only one teaching agriculture, basically. Yeah? And it's for us is an advantage, but also a disadvantage. They're so big and so important that companies sometimes feel like, oh, is every question I pose, do you come up with the solution of Wageningen University? That's impossible for us. People wouldn't trust us anymore. So the response comes from many different sides. Could be other universities in the Netherlands or outside, but also from other companies. And the neutrality is highly appreciated. And usually you can't. If you're a company, this is what you sell. If you're a university, this is what you teach or the research you do. And so this in-between role, if you play it fairly, and you have to be really fair and balanced on that, it's an important one. It's an important one. And it also holds for borders, geographical borders or sectoral borders. There's so often that people from other sectors health sector, but also, for instance, for machinery builders. They're very important for innovations in the food industry. We also love to work with these people. They bring in new insights and help us to take new steps. So we're not hindered by being a vertical organization for one industry, and that holds for most clusters. And then the last one is the connector between big and small. I don't know if it's the case here, but in the Netherlands, yeah, especially the big multinationals, they're very much interested in what small companies do. But for small companies, that's sometimes scary. What is going to happen to you if you sit around the table and maybe share too much with them? So you see this bit of strange relation. On the one hand, you need them, on the other hand, you stay away from them. So this is a fantastic role you can play in between by being really harsh and strict and clear on, let's say, the rules of engagement in there, and connect big and small companies. In the Netherlands, I wouldn't know who else but this kind of organization that could play such a role. That's my last one. When I meet my colleagues in other places and food clusters, they always more or less say the same. I have the most fantastic job in the world because you meet so many passionate people from different worlds, and if you're interested in content, it's cool. But also kind of quite a complicated one, because who are you serving? Eh? It's like you're there for everyone, and yeah, that doesn't really work. So it's many people complain as well. So I like the job, but it's a tough job. Well, I primarily like it. But one of the things that are always there in these clusters is the question: who are you serving? Is it primarily companies? Which companies? Is it big, small, certain industries? What is it? Startup companies? Or are you serving all of them? Are you serving academia? Are you serving government? What government are you serving? So you have to choose. And in the Netherlands we have this kind, it's almost a religion now, where we talk about triple helix kind of things. What do you mean by it? What is a triple helix? Of course you interact with others, but it's too vague. It feels like it's if you sit around the table with all these different backgrounds and things start to roll. That is not true, I would say. You really have to be explicit on this. You have to start from somewhere. Clustering is not about hierarchy, but about connecting the dots. I don't like the expression connecting the dots, but it is not about hierarchy. And that also is, it's interesting. If you're so small and you work with big players, like maybe this is a prestigious big university, but you're one of the players. And for some, maybe different here, but in the Netherlands, some big players have to get used to that fact, that it's not about them, but it's about the system as a whole. It's something you have to keep in mind and that you discuss all the time, also with Unilever kind of organizations. You're there to bring change, and often the change is with other players, and you are one of the many. So it's not about hierarchies. In that sense, it's also different from many regular organizations where there's a clear hierarchy. There's always in these organizations the thing about what is the business model? Where does the money come from? I started with that. It's always there. Do you go for public money or aid money here? In the beginning you have to, because no one knows who you are, so who else is going to pay for that? But how long can you rely on public money? And if you don't rely on public money, are you going to be a company then? But that was not what you had in mind. So this question is always there. It never stops. I haven't seen let's say the final model yet anywhere. Geographical boundaries. Maybe Lebanon is even smaller than the Netherlands, but even in the Netherlands you have always this debate. We are based in Wageningen. Netherlands is peanuts, it's nothing in Europe. And it's still like, oh, but you're based in Wageningen, so you belong to which region, the eastern part of it. I said, come on, it can't be true. We have almost 200 members now. They all work on the forefront of innovation, and all of them, even when they establish the company, they work internationally, because what they sell, whatever they have to sell, they sell it abroad. But from a local perspective, that is different. So the local mayor of Wageningen would say, no, but Food Valley, that is Wageningen. And I recall that once I once went on an international trade thing to Japan with the mayor of Amsterdam. He said, come on, Roger, Food Valley starts in Amsterdam and it ends in Enschede. It's the eastern part of the country. There's endless debate on where the geography starts and where it ends. And also there you have to take a standpoint. When is it successful? I told Jihan when she started, like, the thing you have to, maybe you're used already to that, but it's not about you. And that sometimes is difficult, because you flourish only as a cluster when the companies flourish. So it's really different. You have all kinds of KPIs, so they relate to jobs generated, or to what extent you contribute to big consortia and the size of these consortia and all that. But often companies forget your role because they have to take another 6 or 7 steps. So in the end, they don't even remember that you were the one that brought together this whatever Japanese company and this local company in the Netherlands. It's gone. It's gone. So you have to find mechanisms to make that, to make it be appreciated by you, but also by your environment. That they still understand that you are relevant, yes or no. That's an interesting one in this case. And last but not least, certainly this environment, innovation is really about, for me, the combination of knowledge and business. It's not only one of them, and it's not about research, I would say. Research is not our business. You are good at that, and often you need research to some extent. But innovation is something really completely different. It's about having successful products in the market in the end. And, well, there's some friction sometimes as well. So for us, these are topics which were there like when we started, and they're still there, but with some new dimensions to it. That was, as far as I recall, yeah, that was my presentation. Thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Van Hoosen?
I have a simple question.
Yes.
Now, most of the food value, for example, has companies which are big and some different sizes of companies.
Yeah.
And their contribution to the budget of food valley will also be dependent on the size, isn't it?
Size-based.
I mean, how do you manage this, knowing that, you know, big companies try to, sometimes because they are big funders, they try to capture most of the decision-making process, you know. How do you dilute their power and keep everybody at the same level, you know, if they are funding the biggest amounts?
The way we make our plans is based on a kind of needs assessment we do every year by the end of the year. So all the companies fill in a form, which basically says, are you still happy? And then also, what are your plans for the coming year? If it comes to innovation, isn't it? You can tick the box, and then the next question is, can we contribute to that? And they say yes or no. And there's no distinction between big and small. So so content-wise, there's not more influence by them than by smaller parties. In the board, you see that, yeah, managers of bigger companies have more time apparently than managers of small companies. So here, most of the people in the board represent bigger companies, but we're just strict on that. We define it. We mention like, no, it's not about you. It's about what we do in the system, and it works okay. Frankly speaking, there's up till now, I cannot recall that. No, it's a bit on the interaction with startup companies. There you see that a number of the multinationals are very eager to be involved with startup companies. They don't know how, so they ask a lot of capacity from us. But since also, you know, the young companies are involved, I don't mind that much. It's quite open. So So we have the needs assessment. We have a cap on the number of hours they will get. That changes a bit. Like, but if you would spend more than 10 days on one particular company, we just tell them, you know, it's taking a lot of time. So is it okay if we send you a bill or proposal? And most of the time they don't mind, and I hire extra capacity. So there's not much of power play.
So funding is done by project, not an annual.
No, they pay membership fee. But if you want to have more than it's always every year defined, this is what you get for the money, you pay extra. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. What kind of facilities has Food Valley on to do your job?
Zero.
No facilities?
No. We don't own only offices. What we do have since this year is that we have a fund available to invest in shared facilities. So people can apply if they say, oh, we're interested in building a shared facility. We can also add money to that. But there are so many facilities in the university, in contract research organizations, and in companies available that it's, yeah, and we're not good at that. Others are much better than we. So it's more of making good use of the facilities available.
You try to keep the operating budget low.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we do. We want to remain flexible, and our field is already going too big. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Most welcome.
The facilities for at Plattingen are available for very free of charge, right? I mean,
Oh, free of charge?
not free of charge.
No, people have to pay. People have to pay. And it depends on the equipment you talk about. If it's really sophisticated equipment, you will also have to pay for a certain person that is allowed to work with that equipment. So there's different categories for that. But you always, it's not free of charge. You always have to pay.
Extruder, for example, would be more expensive.
Yeah. 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 That has been also debate in the university, to open up facilities, and of course many of the professors had their own set of rules who could use so that's now brought to one level, so that's good, so everyone knows what the rules are. But the thing is a bit that it's still so complicated. If you look at the website of Agri University, for an average company, they don't understand what it says. So our role is now so, okay, we have a target on having more companies the coming year make use of that equipment, and we see to it that that happens. So it's more the communication role in that particular case, about research facilities, than anything else. The billing and all that is still done by the university. But apart from that, a new thing is that we also look at pilot plant production facility, activities. So many companies have idle capacity, so they use certain production lines 2 or 3 days a week, and for the rest it's idle. And they've indicated that we are more than open that people use these facilities, and that's our role to see to it that they use it. Yeah. But it's a lot of organization, and
Other questions?
Yeah.
Does it happen ever that during the meeting, the bigger companies after the meeting steal kind of the ideas of the smaller companies or what they're trying to do? Innovation.
Yeah, it sometimes happens, but I think from both sides, I think the smaller companies become more smart in how to deal with that. What do you share when, and when do you have to sign NDAs and all that? And also bigger companies, I think, know that if they do that too often, it's not good for their reputation. I just showed briefly this HAS, this agricultural school, and for instance, every January, these product design students, they show their products. And you can go there. It's really nice. They come up with fantastic new products. And there is a problem at the moment. That, yeah, but companies come in and they steal all it, they make the pictures and the products are gone. So there was no policy. They were a bit too open on that. But in our case, if Unilever would do that 2 or 3 times, yeah, it's not good for the reputation. So they're quite careful with that. As far as I know. Yeah. Yes.
Wageningen has a unit, business development unit,
yeah.
linked to, they work with companies,
yeah.
and development, research and development. It's called WUR, Wageningen University and Research. And I wanted to know, how are you connected to
Oh yeah. So Wageningen University, actually the official name of the whole entity is Wageningen University and Research. Half of the people, it's a bit strange, work for the university, and the other half work for the research part, because they're not fully integrated, but it's kind of a metric organization. So you have 5 topics: food and bio-based research, plant sciences, environment science, and all that. So if you are the general manager of food and bio-based research, that means that you are in charge of the chairs of the professors, the university part, but also of the contract research part, which is basically a company nowadays. In the past, they would get the money from the Ministry of Agriculture primarily, but of course that has gone down over the years, and they had to. We are very close to them, but you always have to realize that the second part, the research part, it's a company basically. So every hour that is spent has to be, or 80% or 85% of the hour has to be paid by someone in the external world. And from if you look at it, it's an interesting model because it's also kind of cross-pollination, pollination, that you say, well, these people are close to reality or real questions, and they interact a lot with the people who are more on the research side. But for companies, that's not always clear. So they go to university and they might ask, is there any student who could work on anything? And they end up with a business developer who might cost 1,400 euros a day. So we know them really well, we collaborate with them, but they are a market party. So that's also how we look at them. So it could be anyone who is relevant at that moment to work with. And sometimes we work with the university people as well. It's a bit, It's the only one of its kind in the Netherlands. And apart from this, there is, since 2 years, there is a knowledge valorization unit. So you have and that is also meant to get even more valorization or money out of all this. But it's big, like half of, so like it's a total turnover of that part is like 300 million euros a year. So they're one of the, for us, they're one of the knowledge suppliers. Yeah.
They're more expensive for startups and less efficient. Like in your case, you can use companies that have idle time. And
that's it.
They don't have this access themselves because they're university-based and higher level, more
high level facilities in 30 places in the country. All that overhead has to be paid. So that's what in the beginning I said. Yeah, for politicians, it's easy to say, you know, you have to work for SMEs, but if you have 30 locations in the country with all these facilities, yeah, you have a lot of overhead, and someone has to pay for that. So there's a lot of pressure on Wageningen as well to do these kind of big projects. And for them, working with SMEs is difficult because it's like small projects. Yeah. Oh, you see that in many places, but certainly also there. More than in other universities in the Netherlands who don't have that research part. It's the only one of its kind in the Netherlands. Yeah. Yeah. Does it give you kind of idea of what we're doing? Yeah, most welcome. Most welcome.
Thank you very much.